Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Habanero Honey Sweet Corn Cake. That's right, this was spicy and sweet and savory and dense and moist and very addictive. And I had absolutely no idea what to call this. I mean, it's not really a cake, but it's also not a pie or a pudding or a custard. So I did end up going with cake, since it is inspired by sweet Mexican corn cake. But no matter what you call this, it was phenomenal. And to get started, the first thing we'll need is a couple cups of sweet corn kernels. And to remove those from the cob, what I like to do is hold the ear straight up like this in a bowl on top of some kind of ramekin or overturned cup. And then all we need to do is take a sharp knife and cut straight down. And to me, that's a very safe, very easy way to get all these kernels off. And yes, if you want, you can use frozen corn for this. But if it's available, I do prefer fresh. But either way, once we've measured out 2 cups, we'll go ahead and add 1 minced habanero, which will look like this. And what we'll do is trim off that stem, and then we will cut this open and remove the seeds. At which point we'll slice this into nice thin strips, and then we'll turn those and slice them across into a fairly fine mince. And by the way, do me a favor. Well, actually, do yourself a favor. Wear some gloves when you do this, or use some tongs to hold the pepper, since there's a very good chance you will touch your eye or nose, or certain areas a little farther south. So please be careful. And yes, a habanero is extremely hot, but they are also extremely flavorful and fruity, and will pair perfectly with our fresh sweet corn. And then once those are set, we'll toss them in our bowl, followed by 2 large whole eggs, plus a nice splash of cold fresh water, although you could also use milk if you want. And then we will also want to add a generous amount of honey. And if you're using runny honey, just go ahead and dump it in. But if it's kind of hard and crystallized like mine was, we will want to warm that up in a microwave until it's liquefied. Otherwise, it's just going to be too hard to mix in. But anyway, once that's in there, we'll go ahead and blend this almost smooth. And for that, I'm going to use my stick blender. But if you're into washing a regular blender, go ahead and use one of those. And while we do need enough honey to balance the pepper and make this sweet enough to serve as a dessert, we are not using nearly as much sugar as the traditional Mexican corn cake, which usually includes an entire can of sweetened condensed milk, which for me personally is just way too sweet. And I'm going to touch more on that at the end of the video. And while we do want this pretty smooth, it's totally fine, if not advantageous, to leave the corn with a little bit of texture. So like so many other things, that's going to be up to you. And you can see here how smooth I pureed mine. And that's it, we can go ahead and lose the blender and toss in the rest of the ingredients, including a whole bunch of melted butter, plus some cornmeal, some all-purpose flour, some baking powder. No, not baking soda, baking powder. And then last but not least, a nice big pinch of salt. And that's it, we'll grab a whisk and stir all this together. But do not overmix. Not that it will have any effect on the final product. It really won't. But once something's mixed, why would you keep mixing? I mean, at that point, you're just wasting time, and we probably have other things to do. So as soon as everything's incorporated, we will stop, and we will transfer that into a standard pie dish that's been generously buttered with butter. And once everything's been transferred in, we'll go ahead and give that the old shaka to kind of settle everything down. But do not give it the old tappa unless you put a towel down, because the dish will break and you'll have a big mess. And that's it. This is now ready to transfer into the center of a 350-degree oven for about 45 to 55 minutes, or until our sweet corn cake looks like this. And the top surface should be a nice golden brown. So yes, that looks done. But looks done and is done are often 2 different things. So we'll go ahead and test this with a wooden skewer, which should come out clean. And this did. And now we know for sure we're done. And then I guess you could serve this hot if you have to, but you probably don't have to. So I think we should let this cool down to just barely warm or room temp before we go ahead and cut a slice and serve up. And I guess if we wanted, we could paint some honey on the top to kind of shine up that surface. But of course, that's up to you. I mean, you are after all the Snake Plisskens of whether your corn cake glistens. But I think it looks beautiful as is. And yes, that first piece can always be a challenge to get it out nice and clean. But this wedge came out surprisingly nice. And then as far as garnishes go, I think some fresh fruit like strawberry would be perfect. So I fanned one of those, which I thought would look really nice in the contractually obligated pictures. And then for a couple final touches, I'm going to go ahead and put a spoon of creme fraiche on top, but you could also use sour cream. Or what we really should be using here is Mexican crema, which is very similar to creme fraiche, or just whipped cream. But I think a little bit of acidity here really does bring out the other flavors. And then last but not least, we will hit this with a little bit of freshly grated lime zest, since of course lime and corn are never not great together. And that's it, our habanero and honey sweet corn cake was ready to enjoy. And that, my friends, was just sweet summer corn perfection. And I like sweet, but I love sweet with heat. And even though we only used one small pepper, this was pretty spicy. But the good news is, something sweet will kind of cancel out the heat. So as you eat this, that heat kind of builds up from the habanero at the beginning of the bite. But then about halfway through, the sweetness from the honey kind of cools everything down. And it really is quite the culinary roller coaster. Oh, and regarding the sweetness, as I mentioned, traditionally a Mexican-style corn cake is made with sweetened condensed milk, which for me produces something that's just a little too sweet for my taste. But I have a theory that when that recipe was originated, the corn used in it was not nearly as sweet as what we have today in the market, as in it was very, very starchy and barely sweet. And in that case, all that sugar would make sense. But here we've combined that natural sweetness of the corn with a relatively modest amount of honey, and I think we've achieved a perfect level of sweetness to balance the heat from that pepper. So taste-wise, I just loved absolutely everything about this. Oh, and in the spirit of full disclosure, I had another piece later, well actually several pieces later, after this had been refrigerated, and without a doubt, cold is my favorite temperature to eat this at. And when it is cold, and I know this is going to sound kind of crazy, but it has a mouthfeel and texture very similar to cheesecake, which is very odd since there's no cheese in this. But that really is what it reminded me of, a spicy corn-flavored cheesecake. So maybe that's what I should have called this, or not. But like I said in the intro, no matter what you call this, it is truly unique and incredibly delicious, which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.